3 months passed like 3 years. The war settled into a grinding stalemate that neither side had expected. The Velkhari still had superior numbers and technology, but humanity refused to break. Every attack cost the aliens ships they could not easily replace. Every victory came with losses they had never anticipated. Admiral Yuna barely recognized herself in the mirror anymore. Her hair had gone gray at the temples. New lines marked her face, carved there by stress and exhaustion. She survived on 4 hours of sleep per night, pills to stay awake, and coffee that tasted like motor oil. But she was still standing, still fighting, still refusing to surrender. The fleet had been rebuilt, though not with traditional warships. Earth shipyards now produced vessels designed by desperation. Fast attack craft that struck and vanished before the Velkhari could respond. Drone ships packed with explosives and primitive AI. Stealth vessels that hid in the asteroid belt and ambushed supply convoys. "They are adapting to us," Commander Nari reported during a strategy session. She led the resistance forces at Jupiter Station, the last major human outpost beyond Mars. "They have changed their formation patterns. They scan for kinetic weapons now. They have learned to expect our tactics." "Then we change tactics," Yuna replied, studying the holographic battle map.
"What is their weakness now?"
"Supply lines," Nari said immediately. "They are far from home. Every shot they fire, every ship they lose, they cannot easily replace. We wear them down slowly." It was not a glamorous strategy, not the decisive battle that military historians would write about. Just slow, patient attrition. Make every engagement cost the enemy more than they gained. Force them to question whether human space was worth the price they were paying. At Jupiter Station, Commander Nari executed that strategy with ruthless efficiency. She had 36 ships under her command, mostly civilian vessels modified for combat. Not enough to fight the Velkhari fleet directly, but enough to make them bleed. Nari used Jupiter's massive gravity well as a weapon, luring Velkhari patrol groups into unstable orbits where their superior engines worked against them. She hid ships in the radiation belts that fried Velkhari sensors. She struck at supply vessels, targeting the logistics chain that kept the enemy fleet operational. "Contact bearing 270, her tactical officer called. "Velkhari heavy cruiser, alone and unescorted." Nari studied the sensor data. A single cruiser was still dangerous, capable of destroying her entire force. But it was also an opportunity. The Velkhari were getting arrogant again, assuming their individual ships were untouchable. "All ships execute ambush pattern Hyun 4, she ordered. "Target engines first, weapons second. Hit and run. Do not stay to fight." Her small fleet scattered, approaching from multiple vectors. They used Jupiter's moons for cover, their drives cold to avoid detection. The Velkhari cruiser maintained course, unaware it was being hunted. When Nari's ships opened fire simultaneously from 6 directions, the ambush was perfect. Missiles and kinetic rounds hammered the cruiser's engine section. Shields flared and failed under the focused assault. The Velkhari ship tried to maneuver, but with damaged engines it was sluggish, vulnerable. Nari's ships poured fire into the wounded vessel until it began to break apart. "Cease fire, all ships withdraw," Nari commanded. The Velkhari would send reinforcements, and she had no intention of being there when they arrived. Her force vanished back into Jupiter's shadow, leaving only wreckage behind. One more ship down. One more small victory in a war measured in inches. On Earth, scientist Jiho worked on the problem that could change everything. The captured Velkhari equipment filled his laboratory, pieces of technology salvaged from destroyed ships. Most of it was too damaged to be useful, but Jiho was patient. He studied every component, every circuit, learning how the aliens built their machines. Their technology was not magic. It was just science humanity had not discovered yet. The breakthrough came at 3 a.m. after 2 months of failure. Jiho was examining a shield generator when he noticed something odd about its power distribution. The Velkhari used quantum entanglement for energy transfer, allowing near-instant response to incoming threats. But the system had to prioritize. It could not strengthen all shield facets simultaneously. If you hit a Velkhari shield in multiple places at exactly the same moment, the generator had to choose which impact to protect against. For a microsecond, the other areas were vulnerable. Jiho ran the calculations 3 times to be sure. Then he called Admiral Yuna at 4 a.m, knowing she would still be awake. "I can beat their shields," he said without preamble. "Not permanently, but long enough to matter." Within a week, every human weapon system was retrofitted with Jiho's modifications. Missiles fired in synchronized volleys, railguns calibrated to fire simultaneously. Even small arms were upgraded with timing chips. It was not a perfect solution. The Velkari shield still blocked most attacks, but now humanity could hurt them, could punch through their defenses with coordinated fire. The next engagement proved the concept. A Velkari cruiser found itself facing a human destroyer group. The aliens expected easy victory. Instead, they ran into synchronized weapons fire that slipped through their shields like they were not there. The cruiser survived but limped away with serious damage. News of the victory spread through human-controlled space faster than light-speed communications. People needed hope, needed proof that their sacrifices mattered. Scientist Jiho became a hero overnight, though he barely noticed. He was already working on the next problem, the next breakthrough that might buy humanity another day. Sergeant Kyung became a different kind of hero, the kind soldiers tell stories about. She was just 32 years old, a Marine serving on a transport ship evacuating civilians from an asteroid mining colony. When a Velkari raider group attacked, the transport's military escort was destroyed in the first volley. The Velkari boarded, intending to take prisoners, to break human morale by capturing helpless refugees. They found Sergeant Kyung instead. She held the main corridor alone while 200 civilians evacuated to escape pods. Her rifle was not powerful enough to penetrate Velkari armor, so she aimed for joints and sensors. She used the ship's narrow passages, forcing the aliens to come at her single file. When her ammunition ran out, she used the emergency hull breach protocol, venting sections of the ship to vacuum. 3 Velkari soldiers died trying to reach her. 2 more were sucked into space when she blew the airlocks. The rest finally retreated, unable to believe one human could hold them off. By the time they regrouped, the civilians were gone, safely away in their pods. Kyung did not survive. She died when the transport exploded, taking 3 more Velkari with her. But her action saved 200 lives and the story spread. Other soldiers heard about the sergeant who held the line alone. They found courage in her example, found strength to keep fighting even when hope seemed lost. Ambassador Ji-won tried to find peace in the middle of war. She still sent diplomatic messages to the Velkari command, still searched for some way to end the fighting. The aliens never responded, but she had to try. Every day the war continued, more people died. Humanity was surviving, but survival came with a terrible cost. 2 billion dead in 3 months. Entire cities destroyed. Colonies abandoned. The human race was being ground down to nothing. Maybe we should negotiate surrender, suggested Counselor Junho during a closed session. Save what we can while we still can. No, Ji-won said firmly. We have seen what the Velkari do to conquered species. They do not offer peace. They offer servitude or extinction. I would rather die free than live as their slaves. But privately, she wondered how long humanity could maintain this resistance. Resources were running out. The fleet was holding, but barely. Mars was still contested. The outer colonies were cut off. Earth itself had been attacked twice more, suffering heavy casualties despite successful defense. Then Dr. Hyun discovered something that changed the calculation. He had continued monitoring Velkari communications, and recently he noticed an increase in transmissions toward the edge of their territory. The content was encrypted, but the frequency and urgency suggested problems. Big problems. Admiral, I think the Velkari are fighting other wars, Hyun reported. Their empire is not as stable as they claimed. Yuna leaned forward. Explain. The species they conquered are watching us. They see humans resisting, see the Velkari bleeding. Some of them are beginning to rebel. The Velkari are facing uprisings on multiple worlds. It made perfect sense. The Velkari had conquered through overwhelming force, but they had never faced determined resistance. They thought their reputation alone would keep subject species in line. But humanity had broken that reputation. They had proven the Velkari could bleed, and if they could bleed, they could die. Broadcast this information to the Velkari territories, Yuna ordered. Let every conquered species know that humans are still fighting, still free. Let them see what resistance looks like. Specialist Hana handled the transmission, sending it through captured Velkari communication networks. The message was simple. Images of human ships fighting. Audio of Admiral Yuna's speeches. Video of soldiers like Sergeant Kyung refusing to surrender. Proof that the mighty Velkari dominion could be defied. The Velkari Armada moved through human space like a knife through paper. Earth's defensive satellites lasted 12 minutes. They fired everything they had, missiles and railguns and laser batteries that had taken decades to build. The Valkyrie shields absorbed it all without even flickering. Then the return fire came, precise and devastating. One by one, the satellites turned into expanding clouds of metal fragments. Admiral Yuna watched her defensive network die. Each lost satellite represented years of work, billions in funding, and the hopes of an entire species. She forced herself to keep watching. She needed to see how they fought, how they moved, what patterns they followed. If humanity was going to die, they would at least die learning. Pull back the fleet to lunar orbit, she ordered. Tighten formation. Make them come to us. Her officers obeyed without question. The Earth fleet, what remained of it after the Valkyrie's initial assault, pulled into a defensive sphere around the moon. 200 ships became 180, then 160. The Valkyrie did not hurry. They did not need to. On Mars, Lieutenant Sora had different problems. The Red Planet was under siege. Valkyrie ships surrounded the colony domes, cutting off all supply routes, but they did not attack immediately. They just waited, patient as death, while Mars slowly suffocated. The colony had food for 3 months, water for 6 if they recycled perfectly, and air for as long as the processors kept running. Sora stood in the command bunker deep beneath Dome 7, staring at tactical displays that showed exactly how hopeless their situation was. She was 28 years old, trained for colonial security, not interstellar war. Her job was supposed to be breaking up bar fights and handling mining disputes. Now she commanded the defense of an entire planet. "Lieutenant, the civilians are asking if we are evacuating," her second-in-command said. His name was Private Youngsu, barely 20 years old. He looked exhausted. "Tell them no," Sora replied. "There is nowhere to evacuate to. Earth cannot help us. We are on our own." Youngsu nodded and left. Sora allowed herself one moment of fear, one deep breath that shook in her chest. Then she pushed it down and got back to work. The Valkyrie thought Mars would surrender without a fight. They were about to learn differently. In Earth orbit, Captain Do-hyun led his squadron into hell. The Valkyrie had sent a cruiser group to finish off Luna Base. 20 massive warships, each one powerful enough to glass a continent. Do-hyun had 30 fighters. The math was not good, but math had never stopped humans before. "All wings, listen up," he said over the squadron channel. "We are not going to win this fight. We are just going to make it hurt. Make them remember us. Make them afraid." His pilots responded with grim acknowledgement. They knew what he was asking. They knew most of them would not come back. But they also knew that someone had to slow the Valkyrie down. Give Earth more time to prepare. It might as well be them. The fighters accelerated toward the alien cruisers at maximum thrust. The Valkyrie opened fire with weapons that could destroy spacecraft from 1,000 kilometers away. Do-hyun's squadron scattered, weaving through the barrage with maneuvers that would have killed anyone without military-grade inertial dampeners. 3 fighters died in the first 30 seconds. Then 2 more, but the survivors kept coming, kept pushing forward through impossible odds. They reached attack range and released their missiles. Not the guided smart weapons the Valkyrie expected, but dumb kinetic penetrators moving at relativistic speeds. 2 Valkyrie cruisers took direct hits. Their shields flickered, overloaded by the sheer kinetic energy. 1 cruiser lost main power. The other vented atmosphere from a dozen hull breaches. They were still functional, still dangerous, but they were damaged. Humanity had drawn first blood. Do-hyun did not have time to celebrate. A Valkyrie energy beam caught his fighter's wing, shearing it off. He went into an uncontrolled spin, struggling with controls that barely responded. His squadron scattered, breaking off to return to Luna Base. They had done what they came to do. "Do-hyun is hit," someone shouted over the channel. "He is going down." "Negative," Do-hyun grunted, fighting his dying fighter. "I am going forward." He aimed his tumbling spacecraft at the nearest Valkyrie cruiser and pushed the throttle to maximum. If he was going to die, he would make it count. The cruiser tried to shoot him down, but his erratic spin made targeting impossible. He closed to 500 meters. 300. 100. At the last second, he triggered his fighter's self-destruct. The explosion was not large enough to destroy the cruiser, but it tore through the ship's forward sensor array. The massive warship went blind, its targeting systems dark. It was still alive, but it was wounded. And for the first time since arriving in human space, the Valkyrie fleet hesitated. Back on Earth, engineer Minho worked in a military research facility in Seoul. He had watched the battle unfold on screens, watched Captain Do-Hyun's sacrifice, watched humanity's fleet get torn apart. Now he sat in his workshop, surrounded by holographic blueprints and empty coffee cups, and had an idea. The problem was simple. Human weapons could not penetrate Valkyrie shields. Energy weapons were absorbed, missiles were shot down, and railgun rounds were deflected. But Captain Do-Hyun had proven something important. Kinetic weapons moving fast enough could overload the shields through sheer momentum. Minho pulled up specifications for civilian mining ships. They were sturdy vessels built to haul thousands of tons of ore from the asteroid belt. They had powerful engines designed for long-duration burns, and there were hundreds of them, more than enough to make a difference. His hands moved across the holographic controls, running calculations. If they stripped down the mining ships, removed everything unnecessary, and loaded them with ore payloads. If they accelerated those ships to maximum velocity, toward the Valkyrie fleet. If they turned every civilian vessel into a kinetic missile, the numbers worked. Barely, but they worked. Minho sent the proposal directly to Admiral Yuna. She responded in less than 5 minutes. One word. Approved. Within hours, every mining ship in the Sol system received emergency orders. Drop your cargo. Return to designated assembly points. Volunteer crews only. It was a suicide mission, and everyone knew it. The ships would accelerate until their engines burned out. Then they would become unstoppable projectiles. The crews would have to evacuate in escape pods before impact, and the Valkyrie would probably shoot those pods down. But volunteers came forward anyway. Hundreds of them, miners and engineers and pilots who had spent their lives in the cold of space. They understood what was at stake. They were willing to pay the price. Pilot Yoonji was one of them. She had flown ore haulers for 15 years, boring work that paid well. Her ship was called the Morning Star, old and slow but reliable. She had planned to retire next year, maybe buy a house near the ocean on Earth, finally settle down. Those plans were gone now. Everything was gone except the war and the choice she had to make. She could stay safe, hide in some asteroid station and wait for the Valkyrie to decide humanity's fate. Or she could fight. It was not really a choice at all. Morning Star volunteering for kinetic strike duty. She transmitted to the military coordination channel. Ready when you are. Similar messages came from across the system. The volunteer fleet assembled. 347 ships crewed by people who knew they were about to die. Engineer Minho's teams worked frantically to install basic military targeting systems and reinforce the ships' hulls. It would not save them, but it might give them a few extra seconds to aim properly. On Mars, Lieutenant Sora made her own preparations. The Valkyrie had finally lost patience and begun their assault on the colony domes. Energy weapons hammered the defensive shields while ground troops landed in the rust-colored valleys. Sora had 400 soldiers to defend 6 million civilians. Use the environment, she told her troops. Mars is our home. We know this planet. They do not. The Valkyrie ground forces advanced in tight formation, their armor impervious to human small arms. But Mars was a harsh world, hostile to life. Sora's troops collapsed tunnels, vented dome sections, and led the aliens into dust storms that shut down their sensors. They fought dirty, desperate, using every trick they knew. It was not enough to win, but it was enough to slow them down. Back in Earth orbit, Admiral Yuna gathered her remaining fleet commanders for one final briefing. They all looked exhausted, haunted by losses they had witnessed. But they were still here, still fighting. The mining fleet is ready, Yuna said quietly. When they launch, the Valkyrie will focus on intercepting them. That gives us one chance to hurt them. One chance to show them we are not helpless. Make it count. The officers saluted and returned to their ships. Yuna stayed in the command center, watching the tactical display. The Valkyrie Armada held position near Mars, confident in their victory. They had destroyed humanity's defenses, besieged their colonies, and proven their overwhelming superiority. They had also made humanity angry, and angry humans were dangerous in ways the Valkyrie could not imagine. The attack began at dawn, though dawn meant nothing in space. 347 mining ships ignited their engines simultaneously across the Sol system. From the asteroid belt, from Mars orbit, from hidden positions behind Jupiter's moons, they accelerated toward the Valkyrie fleet. Not the careful acceleration of normal space travel, but emergency burn. Engines pushed past safety limits until the metal glowed white-hot. Pilot Yunji felt the Morning Star shake as the engines roared to life. The acceleration pushed her back into her seat with crushing force. Her ship groaned and creaked, protesting treatment it was never designed to endure. She kept her hands steady on the controls, making tiny adjustments to keep her trajectory true. "Morning Star to all ships," she transmitted. "It has been an honor flying with you all." Similar messages echoed across the volunteer fleet. Goodbyes and prayers and defiant war cries in a dozen different languages. Then the communications went silent as everyone focused on their final task. The Velkari noticed the attack 6 minutes after launch. Their sensors registered hundreds of human vessels moving at unprecedented speeds. At first, they dismissed it as a retreat, ships fleeing the battle. Then their tactical computers calculated the trajectories and realized the truth. These were not running away. These were weapons. The Velkari fleet opened fire. Space lit up with energy beams and missiles, a wall of death meant to stop the mining ships before they could impact. Dozens of vessels died in the first wave, turned to vapor by weapons that could melt continents. But the survivors kept coming, kept accelerating, unstoppable now even if they wanted to stop. Admiral Yuna watched from Luna Base, her face carved from stone. Each dying ship represented lives sacrificed, people who chose death over surrender. She wanted to look away but forced herself to watch. They deserved to be witnessed. "All fleet units execute assault pattern Taehyun 7, she ordered. "Hit them while they are distracted." The Earth fleet surged forward from lunar orbit. Every remaining warship, every fighter, every armed transport threw themselves at the Velkari Armada. They were outgunned and outmatched, but the Velkari were focused on stopping the mining ships. For the first time since the war began, humanity had the initiative. Deep in the military cyber warfare division, Specialist Hana worked her magic. She was 24 years old, small and quiet, the kind of person you would not notice in a crowd, but her mind was a weapon sharper than any missile. For days she had studied captured Velkari communication signals, learning their encryption, understanding their network protocols. The aliens had superior technology, but they had grown arrogant. They did not believe humans could threaten their systems. They were wrong. Hana's fingers flew across her keyboard, launching a virus into the Velkari fleet network. It was not sophisticated by human standards, just a simple program designed to do one thing: delay command signals by 3 seconds. Not enough to disable their ships, but enough to create chaos in their precisely coordinated formations. The virus took hold. Suddenly, Velkari ships were firing on targets that had moved, maneuvering into positions their neighbors expected to be empty. Ships collided, shields overlapped and overloaded, weapon systems locked onto friendly vessels. The confusion lasted only minutes, but minutes were an eternity in combat. The mining ships struck home. Pilot Yunji saw her target fill her view screen, a Velkari capital ship the size of a mountain. She had 15 seconds before impact. Time enough to think about her parents, her brother, the beaches she would never see again. Time enough to be afraid. Then the fear passed, replaced by something else. Pride, determination, the knowledge that she mattered, that her death would mean something. For Earth, she whispered, and activated the Morning Star's self-destruct. The explosion itself was nothing, a small flare in the void. But the Morning Star was carrying 10,000 tons of iron ore, and it was moving at 0.27 light speed. When it hit the Velkari ship's shields, the kinetic energy was beyond calculation. The shields held for exactly 1.3 seconds before failing catastrophically. The ore punched through the capital ship like it was paper. Metal vaporized from the friction, turning into a superheated plasma that cooked the ship from the inside. The Velkari vessel broke apart, spilling atmosphere and debris and bodies into the void. All across the battle space, mining ships found their targets. Some were destroyed before impact. Some missed, but enough hit to matter. Velkari capital ships died, cruisers split in half, destroyers simply ceased to exist. In 10 minutes of carnage, humanity destroyed more than a third of the invasion fleet. The Velkari had never experienced losses like this. In 10,000 years of conquest, no primitive species had hurt them so badly. Their tactical computers struggled to process what was happening. Their commanders issued conflicting orders. unsure how to respond to an enemy that weaponized civilian ships. General Tae-hyun chose that moment to reveal Earth's final surprise. Deep beneath the Sahara Desert, the Himalayas, the Amazon rainforest, and a dozen other locations, massive doors opened. Elevator platforms rose, carrying weapons that had taken 50 years to build. Electromagnetic launch cannons, each one 3 kilometers long, capable of throwing projectiles into orbit at tremendous velocity. The Valkyrie had seen these installations during their initial reconnaissance. They had dismissed them as primitive, useless against shielded warships. They had made a critical error. The cannons were not designed to shoot into space. They were designed to shoot through it. The first salvo launched at 90% light speed. Solid tungsten rods, each one the size of a telephone pole, accelerated through magnetic fields strong enough to warp steel. They left Earth's atmosphere in microseconds and crossed the distance to the Valkyrie fleet before sensors could track them. The impacts were devastating. At near light speed, even small projectiles carried world-ending energy. Valkyrie shields failed instantly, unable to disperse that much kinetic force. Ships exploded, their hulls unable to withstand the sudden energy transfer. The survivors scattered, breaking formation for the first time since arriving in human space. General Tae-hyun allowed himself a grim smile. The planetary defense grid had been his project, his obsession for the last 2 decades. Politicians called it a waste of money. Military analysts said it would never work. But Tae-hyun had believed. He had known that someday, somehow, humanity would need these weapons. Today was that day. On Mars, Lieutenant Sora saw the Valkyrie orbital fleet suddenly pull back, recalled to defend against Earth's counterattack. The ground troops remained, but without orbital support, they were vulnerable. Sora keyed her command channel. "All units advance," she ordered. "Take back our planet." The Mars defense forces surged forward from their bunkers and tunnels. They were still outnumbered and outgunned, but the Valkyrie were confused, receiving conflicting orders, unsure whether to press the attack or withdraw. Sora's troops exploited every moment of hesitation. Private Young-soo led a team through the maintenance tunnels beneath Dome 3, emerging behind a Valkyrie position. His squad carried mining explosives repurposed for war. They planted charges on the alien equipment and retreated before the Valkyrie realized what was happening. The explosion took out an entire command post. Similar attacks happened across Mars: hit and run, ambush and fade. Human fighters using knowledge of their own planet against invaders who did not understand the terrain. It was not enough to win the planet back, but it was enough to survive. And survival was victory. In space, Captain Do-hyun struggled with his crippled fighter. Somehow he had survived the collision with the Valkyrie cruiser, ejecting at the last second in an escape pod. Now he drifted in the debris field, watching the battle unfold. His pod had minimal life support, no weapons, and limited propulsion. He was effectively out of the fight. Then he saw something that changed everything: a Valkyrie shuttle, damaged and tumbling, venting atmosphere. It was small, maybe a command ship or transport, and it was heading toward him, caught in the same orbital decay that trapped his pod. Do-hyun checked his suit's remaining oxygen. 20 minutes. Not enough to reach Luna base, but maybe enough for something else. He fired his pod's thrusters, matching velocity with the shuttle. It took 3 tries and most of his remaining fuel, but he managed to grab onto the hull. The shuttle's airlock was damaged, but still functional. Do-hyun cycled through, not knowing if he would find vacuum or breathable atmosphere on the other side. The airlock opened into a corridor. Emergency lights flickered. Gravity was out, leaving everything in 0G. And at the far end of the corridor, Do-hyun saw a Valkyrie. It was the first time he had seen the enemy face to face. The Valkyrie was tall, maybe 3 meters, with skin that shimmered like oil on water. It wore damaged armor and carried a weapon that looked organic and technological at the same time. Its eyes, if those were eyes, fixed on Do-hyun with something that might have been surprise. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Do-hyun pushed off from the wall and attacked. The fight was brutal and desperate. Do-hyun had military combat training, but the Valkyrie was stronger, faster, and had reach advantage. Its weapon fired some kind of energy beam that burned through the shuttle's interior. Do-hyun dodged, using the 0G environment to his advantage. The stars had never seemed so hostile until that day. Admiral Yuna stood on the observation deck of Luna Base, staring at the screens showing the largest fleet humanity had ever witnessed. The ships stretched across space near Jupiter like a metal storm, each vessel the size of a small city. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Her own fleet of 200 ships looked like toys in comparison. She had been drinking coffee when the first alert came through. Now the cup sat forgotten on her desk, growing cold while the universe changed forever. Humanity had always wondered if they were alone. Today they got their answer, and it was not the one anyone had hoped for. Dr. Hyun rushed into the command center, his tablet shaking in his hands. He was the best xenobiologist on Earth, trained for this exact moment, but nothing could have prepared him for what he was seeing. The alien ships did not match any theoretical design. They were beautiful and terrible, covered in symbols that hurt to look at too long. "Admiral, they are broadcasting on all frequencies," Hyun said, adjusting his glasses nervously. "It is a message, a demand." Yuna turned from the window. Her face showed no emotion, but inside her heart was racing. She had commanded ships for 20 years, fought in 3 colonial disputes, and earned every medal the Terran Council could give. None of that mattered now. She was about to speak to beings from another world. "Put it through," she ordered. The voice that filled the command center was not human. It spoke perfect English, but there was something wrong about it. Too smooth, too cold. It reminded Yuna of ice cracking on a frozen lake. "Humans of Earth. We are the Velkari Dominion. For 10,000 years we have ruled 300 worlds across 12 sectors. We have absorbed countless species into our empire. You will be no different. You have 72 hours to surrender your planet and all colonies. Comply and your integration will be peaceful. Resist and we will take what we want by force." This is not a negotiation. This is a fact. The transmission ended. Silence filled the command center. Yuna could hear her own breathing, could feel every eye turning toward her. She was 43 years old. She had a daughter on Earth studying art and soul. She had a sister on Mars working in the agriculture domes. She had a life that made sense just 5 minutes ago. "Get me the Terran Council," Yuna said quietly. "And someone find Captain Do-hyun. Tell him to prepare his squadron for combat operations." Across Luna Base, alarms began to sound. Captain Do-hyun was already in his fighter when the alert reached him. He had seen the alien fleet appear and knew what it meant. Unlike the politicians on Earth, he did not need time to think. The aliens had made a threat. That made them enemies. Everything else was just details. His squadron gathered in the briefing room 20 minutes later. 30 pilots, the best humanity had. They looked scared. Do-hyun did not blame them.
He was scared too.
But fear was just another thing to push through, like pain or exhaustion or doubt. "Listen up," he said, keeping his voice steady. "We all saw what just jumped into our system. We all heard what they said. They think we are going to roll over and give them everything. They think we are weak because our ships are smaller, because our weapons are primitive, because we have only been in space for 200 years. He paused, looking each pilot in the eye. "They are wrong about us, and we are going to prove it." On Earth, Ambassador Ji-won stood before the Terran Council in Geneva. The chamber was chaos. Representatives from every nation shouted over each other, demanding action, demanding answers, demanding the impossible. Ji-won raised her hand for silence and surprisingly got it. "We cannot fight them," she said simply. "They have the numbers. They have the technology. Every military analysis says we lose in a direct conflict. So we surrender?" Someone shouted. "No," Ji-won said firmly. "We buy time. We negotiate. We learn about them. And while we do that, every ship, every weapon, every defense platform we have gets ready for war, because they are going to attack regardless of what we say. Species like this do not offer surrender terms unless they plan to attack anyway." She was right. Though nobody wanted to admit it, Dr. Hyun worked through the night, analyzing every second of the alien transmission. The Velkari ships used quantum drives, something humanity had only theorized about. Their hulls were made from materials that should not exist according to Earth physics. They had energy shields, graviton weapons, and computing power that made human AI look like ancient calculators. But Hyun noticed something else. The Velkari ships all moved in precise formations. They maintained exact distances from each other. Their communication was rigid, formal, predictable. They were an old empire, and old empires became set in their ways. They did not adapt because they had never needed to. Humanity had only been in space for 2 centuries. Everything they did was new. Everything was experimental. They had no traditions holding them back. No ancient strategies they followed blindly. They could change, improvise, and do things no logical military would consider. It was not much of an advantage, but it was something. The 72 hours passed like 72 years. Earth's factories worked around the clock, building missiles and armor plating. Mars began evacuating civilians to underground shelters. The asteroid mining colonies sent every ounce of ore they had to the military shipyards. Humanity moved like it had never moved before, united by threat and fear and stubborn pride. Admiral Una did not sleep during those 3 days. She studied the alien fleet, mapped their positions, and planned strategies she knew would probably fail. Captain Do-Yun drilled his pilots until they could fly combat patterns in their sleep. Ambassador Ji-Wan sent 14 different diplomatic messages to the Valkyrie, each one ignored. Dr. Hyun kept searching for weaknesses that might not exist. When the deadline arrived, the Valkyrie fleet moved. They did not negotiate. They did not warn. They simply opened fire on Mars Colony Outpost 7, a research station home to 3,000 scientists and their families. The energy beams crossed millions of kilometers in seconds. The station's shields lasted for exactly 4 seconds before collapsing. Then the station itself ceased to exist, turned to vapor and debris. 3,000 people died before humanity could even respond. Admiral Una watched the destruction from Luna Base. Her hands gripped the command railing so hard her knuckles turned white. Around her, officers stood frozen, horrified by what they had witnessed. The Valkyrie had just committed mass murder to make a point. They wanted humanity to understand the cost of resistance. They got their message across, but they made a critical mistake. They showed humanity exactly what would happen if they surrendered. They showed there was no mercy in the Valkyrie Dominion, no peaceful integration, just death and subjugation. Una activated the fleet-wide channel. Every ship, every station, every human military asset heard her voice. All forces, this is Admiral Una. Battle stations, we are at war. The war for humanity's survival had begun. The Valkyrie fleet gathered for the final assault like a storm building on the horizon. Every ship they had remaining in human space, pulled from blockade duty, from patrol routes, from reserve positions across the Sol system. 400 vessels, bruised and battered from months of fighting but still deadly. They formed up in Earth orbit, a wall of metal and fury that blotted out the stars. Admiral Una watched them gather from Luna Base. She did not sleep anymore. Sleep was a luxury humanity could no longer afford. Instead, she stood at the command, center window drinking her 20th cup of coffee, studying the enemy formation. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. Fleet status, she said quietly. All available ships reporting ready, her tactical officer replied. We have 237 military vessels, 412 armed civilian craft, and another 1,000 volunteer ships requesting combat assignments. Una did a quick mental calculation. Against 400 Valkyrie warships, the numbers were not good. But numbers had never told the whole story. Humanity had been outnumbered from the beginning. They were still here. Accept all volunteers, she ordered. Anyone willing to fight deserves that chance. Across Earth, people prepared for the end or the beginning. Cities activated their defense shelters. Families said goodbyes that might be final. Soldiers checked their weapons and made peace with their choices. The entire planet held its breath, waiting for the battle that would determine the fate of their species. On Mars, Lieutenant Sora received orders to evacuate all remaining military forces to Earth. The Red Planet was lost, the Valkyrie ground troops in control of major population centers. But Sora looked at those orders and made a different choice. Negative on the evacuation, she transmitted back. Mars will not fall quietly. She gathered her remaining soldiers, maybe 2,000 troops scattered across the planet. They were exhausted, running low on ammunition, fighting a losing battle, but they were still fighting. Listen up, Sora told them over the command channel. Earth is about to face everything the Valkyrie have left. If we can keep even a few enemy ships busy here, that might make the difference. We stay. We fight. We hold our home. Nobody argued. They all knew it was a suicide mission. They stayed anyway. In Seoul, engineer Minho worked on his final innovation. The gravity well generators that had proven so effective were powerful but short-ranged. He needed something that could affect the entire battle space, something the Velkari would not expect. The answer came from the most unlikely source. Earth itself, the planet's magnetic field, the invisible shield that protected humanity from solar radiation. Minho realized he could weaponize it. With enough power, he could create magnetic pulses that would disrupt the Velkari ship's quantum drives. Not disable them completely, but slow them down, reduce their maneuverability. It would require channeling massive amounts of energy through Earth's power grid. Rolling blackouts. Civilian infrastructure shut down. Every city, every nation contributing power to one desperate gambit. The cost would be enormous. Minho sent the proposal to the Terran Council. They approved it in 12 minutes. Do it, they said. Whatever it takes. Captain Do-hyun had survived his suicide mission. Rescued by a patrol group after 3 days floating in a damaged escape pod. Now he stood in the fighter bay preparing to fly again. His squadron had been rebuilt. New pilots replacing the dead. Young faces trying to hide their fear. This is different from before, Do-hyun told them. Before we were fighting for survival. Now we are fighting to win. The Velkari think this final assault will break us. We are going to prove them wrong one last time. The pilots saluted. Do-hyun climbed into his new fighter, feeling the familiar weight of the flight suit, the controls that had become extensions of his own body. He had flown in a dozen battles now, survived against impossible odds. He was not sure his luck would hold, but he was done counting odds. The Velkari attacked at exactly 0600 Earth Standard Time. Their fleet descended like the hammer of an angry god, weapons blazing, shields at maximum. They had learned from 3 months of war, adapted their tactics, planned for human desperation. This time they would not underestimate their enemy. This time, they would finish it. Earth's defenses opened fire. General Taehyun's planetary cannons spoke first, hurling tungsten rounds at near light speed. The Velkari shields were ready, absorbing impacts that would have destroyed their fleet months ago. But scientist Jiho's modifications meant human weapons fired in perfect synchronization. Shield generators overloaded trying to defend against simultaneous strikes. 3 Velkari cruisers died in the opening salvo, then 5 more. But the fleet kept coming, weathering losses that would have broken any other force. They were committed now, everything riding on this final assault. Admiral Yuna unleashed her fleet. 237 warships, 400 armed civilian craft, and over 1,000 volunteer vessels surged forward to meet them. It was not a battle. It was a collision, 2 forces slamming together with the violence of crashing worlds. Space lit up with weapons fire and explosions, ships dying by the dozens on both sides. Captain Do-hyun led his squadron into the heart of the chaos. Velkari fighters swarmed around his group, trying to overwhelm them through sheer numbers. But Do-hyun's pilots had learned tactics the aliens could not match. They fought dirty, used debris fields for cover, ambushed from unexpected angles, human creativity against alien precision. Break by pairs, engage targets of opportunity, Do-hyun ordered. His squadron scattered, each pair of fighters hunting independently. It was the opposite of Velkari doctrine, chaotic and unpredictable. The enemy formation struggled to respond. Do-hyun locked onto a Velkari fighter and fired. The alien pilot tried to evade, but Do-hyun had anticipated the move. His missiles found their target, another small victory in a battle measured by thousands of such victories. On the ground, Engineer Minho activated his weapon. Power surged through Earth's electrical grid, channeled through modified substations and focused by massive magnetic coils. The planet's magnetic field pulsed, a wave of energy that rippled outward into space. Velkari ships suddenly found their quantum drives destabilized, their perfect maneuvers becoming sluggish and imprecise. The effect lasted only minutes before the generators overloaded, but minutes were enough. Human ships pressed their sudden advantage, targeting enemies that could not dodge as effectively. More Velkari vessels died, their formation breaking apart under relentless pressure. Specialist Hana launched her final cyber attack. She had spent weeks preparing it, a virus so complex it would take Velkari computer experts days to unravel. It did not try to disable their ships or shut down their weapons. Instead, it did something simpler and more devastating. It made their targeting systems aim 6 meters to the left, not far enough that they would notice immediately, just enough to make them miss. In combat where milliseconds mattered, where precise targeting meant the difference between life and death, 6 meters was everything. Velkari ships fired at human vessels and hit empty space. They compensated, adjusted their aim, fired again. By the time they realized what was happening, dozens more ships had died, wasted fire hitting nothing while human weapons found their marks. The Velkari fleet commander, watching his forces take unprecedented casualties, made a desperate decision. He ordered a full assault on Luna base, hoping to kill Admiral Yuna and break human command structure. 50 of his best ships broke formation and accelerated toward the moon. They ran directly into Commander Nari's trap. She had brought her Jupiter station forces back to Earth, hiding them behind the lunar far side. When the Velkari ships committed to their attack, Nari's fleet struck from their blind spot. Missiles and kinetic rounds tore into the enemy formation at point-blank range. The surprise was complete. 30 Velkari ships died before they even knew they were under attack. The survivors tried to fight back, but they were caught between Nari's ambush and Luna base's fixed defenses. It was a slaughter. For humanity, Commander Nari said quietly, watching the enemy burn. For every colony you destroyed. For every person you killed. On Mars, Lieutenant Sora made her final stand. The Velkari had left a garrison of 20 ships to hold the planet. When Earth's battle began, Sora launched every asset she had left. Ground-based missiles, hidden defense platforms, even commandeered civilian spacecraft packed with explosives. Everything hit the Velkari garrison simultaneously. 5 enemy ships exploded. 3 more were crippled. The rest broke orbit, recalled to the main battle. Mars was free, bought with the lives of soldiers who refused to surrender their home. Sora stood on the surface in her environment suit, watching the enemy flee. Around her, the ruins of humanity's first colony world stretched to the horizon. It would take years to rebuild. But they had time now. They had won that much. The main battle raged for 6 more hours. Ships died by the hundreds. Space became a graveyard of twisted metal and frozen bodies. Human forces suffered terrible losses, watching their fleet diminish with every passing minute. But the Velkari losses were worse. They had committed everything to this assault, and humanity was making them pay for every inch. Captain Do-hyun's fighter took a hit that sheared off his wing. Again. He seemed to have terrible luck with wings.